Good morning, everyone. I'm Kate Seeley, Vice President for Arts and Culture here at the Middle East Institute, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's panel discussion on the role of comedy in social justice, in breaking taboos, and in helping people address difficult and painful issues. We have a great group of panelists here today to discuss the positive role of comedy in so many ways, and I feel confident in saying that we're going to have an enlightening and fun and even a funny conversation today. And today's panel marks the start of something very unique for MEI in partnership with comedy host Rolla Z, who's here center stage. We're launching DC's first annual Traumedy Festival, supported by the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities with support from the NEA. And we're devoting a panel and 2 comedy shows over the course of this weekend to exploring the value and role of comedy in addressing difficult and painful topics, in giving voice to the voiceless, and in helping shift a society's perceptions about taboos. Now, Rolla Z is a DC-based comedy host who's been running sold-out comedy shows with largely Arab American communities around the DC community under the title of Funny Arabs. And in the course of growing her comedy brand, she's developed sort of a new parallel take on comedy, which she calls Traumedy. And it is the art of turning pain into punchlines and using laughter to help with healing. And through her Traumedy shows, she brings many different communities together to share their universal stories of displacement, of gender bias, of inequality, of racism, and more through her lens of humor. And in the process, her Traumedy shows really help build connections between communities that don't normally come together, which makes them additionally unique. And in fact, she has been dubbed the Traumedian by Washingtonian magazine, given all of her amazing work in this sphere. Yes, I know, right? I was thinking, what a great marketing title. So why is MEI involved with this Traumedy concept, as many people have asked me? Well, we've done several straight-up Arab comedy shows here at MEI with Rolla, and they've all been sold out to connect, and we've done that to connect with the Arab American community and to really create a community space here at MEI. But in this current moment, given the Gaza war, given growing Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, it just felt like Traumedy was the most sensitive way to come together to release stress and anxiety and to do it with a broader community to build more solidarity during this terrible time. And so we saw an opportunity to bring our community in, to provide some release and relief, and also to cultivate younger audiences through Traumedy. So tonight we host our very first Traumedy show at 7 p.m., hosted by Rolla, with humor provided by, is it 7 comedians? 7 comedians, including Joe Marshall, who's here with us on the stage. We're also being joined by Arab American comedian Yasmin Al-Hadi, who's incredibly funny, and Sami Tamimi from Richmond, among many others. And we just sold out this morning, our 110 seats, so we're very happy about that. I was sweating it a little bit, but Rolla kept telling me, this is an audience that buys their tickets late. They don't buy in advance. And tomorrow night, we take the program to Busboys and Poets in Anacostia in another sold-out show with another 7 comedians. So I'm sorry if you're not able to join us tonight. We'll tell you all about it, and hopefully we'll do some more. So thank you for coming to this talk to explore the history and role of comedy and being part of our festival launch. And now I'd like to turn today's panel over to our moderator, Rena Natour. She runs a program for us called Creators Corner, interviewing famous Arab and Arab American celebrities and whatnot. And Rena is also a journalist and TV producer based in Washington, D.C. Her work has appeared on the PBS NewsHour, on Vice, and on ABC News. She helped produce the documentary Speed Sisters, set in the West Bank, and was a Fulbright Scholar to the UAE. So a very talented young lady. Rena, over to you.
Thank you. I want to apologize in advance for my voice today. I have a sinus infection. I'm not contagious, but that's what this is about. And thank you, Kate, and hello, everyone. Anyone following the news today, following the war in Gaza, may feel that there is not much to laugh about. And there isn't for many people, but it is the job of 3 people on this panel to make people laugh no matter what. And the idea of this exercise, it goes by many names: dark comedy, traumedy, and it's not new, and it's really a revolutionary act in many ways. And the impact of this type of comedy on what's happening around us, even if it's profoundly unfunny, it has a profound impact on us individually and socially. And that's what we're here to talk about with these 4 amazing panelists. This discussion will be rather short, about 45 minutes to an hour long, and then we'll turn it over to you, the audience, for some questions. I'm going to introduce everyone really briefly, but you can find their full bios in the flyer, in the event flyer. Katie Burham is an award-winning media producer, book author, and professor. She serves as the executive director of American University's Center for Media and Social Impact, and she is the provost associate professor in the School of Communications. She co-founded the Yes and Laughter Lab, a creative incubator of comedy for social justice, and authored the book that I have here with me, The Revolution Will Be Hilarious. I highly recommend it. Thank you, Katie. Rula Z is a producer, MC, and comedian. She has been really integral in fostering the comedy scene here in DC. She is the creator and promoter behind Traumedy, DC's only dark comedy show, and the creator and host of the very popular Funny Arabs comedy show. And she also helped organize this event today and later tonight. So thank you, Rilla. Joe Marshall is the founder of Space Between Commands Studios. He is a trained actor and stand-up comedian. He currently produces a monthly comedy show called Comedy Lab, which has been featured by WUSA 9 and the Washington Post. He also partners with Victory Christian Ministries International in Northeast DC to produce and host a monthly men's session where men can heal naturally, mentally, spiritually, and emotionally through their progressive conversations. Thanks, Joe, for coming. And Tamara Sharafov is a licensed clinical social worker, an expert in the newest forms of psychotherapy, third-wave contextual behavioral therapies, contextual dialectical behavioral therapy, and acceptance and commitment therapy. She has additional expertise on PTSD and complex trauma and systemic racism and the impact that has on us mentally. She runs a private practice and is a lecturer at the University of Chicago Master's School of Social Work. So thank you all for coming. You all are very, very busy people. That's some impressive bios there. Katie, I want to turn to you because you argue in your book that comedy does have the power to affect social change, but a lot of people think of it as entertainment, something we do to get our minds off things. So what was your journey to making this argument, to writing your book, and what are some examples that you see in the world out there?
Great question. So hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. A fun fact about me is I shattered my shoulder in January. Did anyone else have that happen to them? No. Okay. I wanted one person to say yes and then to show me your range of motion, because right now my arm only goes like this. Anyway, I'm in PT, I'm in rehab, I think I'm gonna be okay, but I've had many people say, I think you need to get therapy for the trauma of your accident. Like, oh, here's the person. Anyway,
Right here.
in all seriousness, I'm actually naming that too, because part of my story is that my great mentor was Norman Lear, the legendary television producer. He actually just passed in December at 101. And one of the things that I was a producer and philanthropy director for him for a long time. And one of the things that he used to always say in entertainment, but he had so many wise things, right? So I made them all like life things. He would say, when there's a hole in the plot, you have to shine a spotlight on it instead of acting like no one notices. So I thought I would name for you that my body doesn't work right, in case you're wondering why I'm stiff. And also, this is only my second talk since my accident, so I'm very, very excited to be here. I'm an extrovert back in the wild, so prepare yourselves for the blizzard of words. Okay, so let me try to answer that. I'm not a comedian, though. I'm a funny professor. So yeah, I'll try to stay on I've actually written 2 books on comedy and human rights and social change. The first one is called A Comedian and an Activist Walk into a Bar, the serious role of comedy and social change. And this book is my newest book on this topic. But actually, part of the reason that I wrote the books is because I was so frustrated that we did not take comedy seriously in spaces that I actually love, civil society, human rights. I mean, that my whole career has been in media and social change and human rights. So I've spent 25 years doing this work in a variety of different capacities. And so this is my favorite kind of group of people, those of us that have devoted our life to a purpose-filled mission, and in my case, using entertainment and media for social good. And I just thought, why are we so serious in this sector? Why are we missing the comedy role? So what started me on this journey, and I'll give you kind of a good science answer too, there's a lot of social science in this book. Well, now you've heard that I was frustrated. So I worked for Norman Lear, as mentioned, and it wasn't just Norman Lear's work that was so meaningful, it was actually Norman Lear as a person. He was very, very fun in the office and a very hammy person, and I am also a hammy person. So he was kind of the first adult I saw, like a very successful television producer, also rich. You know, I mean, he was like successful, but he was the first adult I was around that would actually play in meetings and this man could make anyone do anything. I've never seen anything like it because he was so charming through the comedy. So I thought, oh, that's also a leadership quality. Got it. Let me figure out how to be an adult with and using what I already have. So this work for me started with a documentary that I produced with Hassan Minhaj, who now, of course, is famous. I like to say on that project that it was like a second before he was really famous, or we couldn't have gotten him for this movie. I actually think that's true. It was like this year before he got on The Daily Show. Anyway, but the project was called Stand Up Planet, and it was funded by the Gates Foundation. And so I don't share that with every audience, but I think for a DC policy audience, I want you to know that the comedy work started from the most serious possible way. It started from this kind of challenge of can we get people to engage in global development and global poverty and the Millennium Development Goals, now Sustainable Development Goals. Can we get people to actually engage in ways that go beyond how we expect to usually see stories like this? My other love is documentaries, so I'm not dismissing comedy, of course, because I also write books on comedy or documentary and investigative journalism. But we always expect to only see a certain kind of cultural approach to telling stories and bringing people in. So anyway, that started a big research agenda that I started at American University because I really wanted to ask and answer the question, what do we actually know across disciplines of study? Because, by the way, everyone has studied comedy, every discipline, sociology, psychology, social work, communication studies, where I am, history, literature. But it was not all available in one place, and I thought there were a lot of unanswered questions. So to get finally to sort of wrap that up and give a proper answer, if we actually look historically at the very first definitions of comedy and why people were thinking about comedy really in ancient times. So Aristotle is who we think. My joke is always like, it was probably a woman and he took credit, but that's I have no basis for that. That's just me being like an angry feminist. But Aristotle said that, comedy was a form of, almost like a governance strategy, right? Comedy was needed for a society to point out what is so grotesque and unjust and absurd that it deserves to be lampooned, and that is how we self-correct. So actually, the original idea was comedy was not just the idea that it's entertainment, back to your question, but the idea that we actually have to use comedic strategies to connect with people. Fast forward 10 years later, I've been doing this big research agenda, and I run a bunch of things about comedy, and I wrote books about them. The thing that's really important to say that maybe I can say differently because I've been doing this work for a while is I think we often discount the importance of comedy in letting us show our deepest flawed human selves. And there's so much connection when we show our flaws, right? So how many of you liked me more when I said I had a broken shoulder, right? So, and if we think about the tropes in culture, villain and hero, which is often where we go with many kinds of tragedy, it's hard to connect with either one of those sometimes, right? If we're just normal people that are like, I had a bad day and my kid sucks, right? So I think that comedy, and there's lots of research, blah, 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 but the fact that comedy can invite us in to be flawed and to connect with one another and then find our shared humanity, to me, that's actually the essence of why comedy is so magic, that we can find a way to connect because we're not perfect and because comedy is so confessional and messy and flawed. That's how we can sort of lean in. So that's just one of the things that I think.
And when you think of a comedian or a bit currently or in recent memory that's affected social change or has touched on something happening in our world today that gets people to think beyond what just talking about it straight would do, what do you think of? I mean, I think of The Daily Show. I think of Jon Stewart's like victorious return to that anchor chair.
Monday.
But yeah, exactly. Monday, right?
Yeah.
But what do you think when you think of it?
Well, I might have sort of an unexpected answer to that, which is I think that when we think about comedy in the marketplace, that's the other way that comedy in the entertainment industry in the marketplace, right? So part of the work that I do is to agitate the gatekeepers within that space because there are not enough women, people of color, queer, LGBT, So agitating the gatekeepers means that we can access more amazing comedians like Yasmin Al-Hadi I work with all the time. I just sent her a bunch of texts like, hey, look at me, with Rolla, like, hey, we're friends now. But I think what we don't think about is there are so many comedians who are not yet big time famous yet, and that's where the social change is, actually. That's what I think. So I'll give a couple of different stories. It's small and incremental, right? Of course, I could go on and on about big comedians, but that would be a very expected answer. You'd be like, okay, well, here's my favorite comedian. I'm not sure that's my most interesting answer. There is a guy named Corey Ryan Forrester, who I wrote about in the book. He wrote a book called The Liberal Redneck Manifesto with these two other white rednecks, and they're totally charming. And he's from the part of Georgia where I know we're not doing politics here, and that's fine. Marjorie Taylor Greene's district. He has a very, very specific, thick Southern accent, and he looks like what you would expect from the role that he plays, right? But he is a very loving, progressive. He's very sweet. He sells out comedy shows here all the time. What I wrote about in the book, I wrote about a big project that we worked on together, but and by the way, when I introduced Corey Ryan Forrester and Yasmin Al-Hadi to each other, because you all are going to meet Yasmin later, so I'm not going to spoil it. Part of her life was in the South. They are like now the closest friends, and you would not expect that. But he says, look, part of what I can do with my comedy in the Deep South, I can go to places in Alabama and Mississippi and Louisiana, truly the Deep South, and because I look how I look and I sound how I sound, they're going to trust me to bring them on a journey. So he says, I come in and I start with, he's like, I know exactly what I'm doing. I do some jokes about like, you have a Mima, I have a Mima, are you lactose intolerant? Me too. And then 3/4 of the way through, he'll do an anti-homophobia joke or an anti-racism joke. And he says, you know what? They would never come to my critical race theory TED Talk ever, but they will come to my comedy show. And he says, it's not that I think they walk out thinking like, I'm not racist anymore. But he says every time a couple of people come up to him and say, I never thought about it that way before. You made me think. Now that's where I think there's magic. We are actually doing a comedy tour this summer with Yasmin Al-Hadi as one of our main comedians. And it is based on this premise of also the interpersonal magic of comedy, that you can connect with people in a very small venue and maybe have them think differently and be, well, I've never met someone like you, fill in the blank what someone like you might mean, right? Like many marginalized people, women, people of color, etc. And there's another story that I'll tell. Do you all know the comedian Negin Farsad? Okay, well, you all need to look her up after this. Negin Farsad is one of the funniest comedians. She she produced a documentary early 2000s with, I think Jon Stewart was the executive producer, and it's called The Muslims Are Coming. And she made it, she's so charming. You will find her on NPR on the weekends hosting, wait, don't tell me. She did a huge TED Talk with more than 1 million views on why comedy and social change. But Negin, it made this documentary. It's comedic. It's like Negin goes on a romp throughout the country and is like, why Islamophobia? And she's really engaging people in this one-on-one level. She kind of repeated this later. I can't get over that she did this, but after the far-right rally in Charlottesville that was tragic in many ways, she kind of did a series of comedy stunts there. She kind of showed up and really engaged people in talking. And Negin has talked about this publicly, and you can see this work. And just the conversations that she was able to have and how people engaged. And one of the scenes from The Muslims Are Coming that I love, I actually show in a class that I created about comedy for social change. She's going throughout the country and she sets up this table, and you have to step up and guess whether a verse or an idea is from the Quran, the Bible, or the Torah. And it's so great because people will come, and she's in the Deep South, and someone was like, well, I'm a deacon in the Baptist church, so that's definitely the Old Testament, whatever. Wrong, it's the Quran. And it's really fun because you get people going like, really? I didn't know. And think about how badly that could go, right? Like, we're gonna talk about religion today, what do you think? But instead, it's this kind of look how much we actually don't know about one another. Look where we even think we can. And she kind of strips out all of those walls. And it is truly one of my favorite comedy moments. So I think that comedians and projects like that is part of the work that I do, because I don't think of course, we love it when someone like Negin Farsad is famous because she can reach more people in the marketplace, of course. But I also love that Negin goes to smaller places and engages people one-on-one, like, what do you think now, right? And it's usually not, the same as they started.
Well, going to Charlottesville after what she saw is definitely a bold move.
Yeah, yeah. She was like, what do you think if I can't travel to see my family in Iran? And after she spent time with people, they're like, oh, well, not you. She's like, well, yeah, that's who we're talking about. I mean, it's she has an amazing skill set. Not every comedian can do, that's not even just crowd work exactly. That's like this kind of deep psychology work, and she's so talented at it. So.
And Rola, I wanted to ask you about what it's been like for you. You produce a show called Funny Arabs. And particularly for Middle Eastern people and the Palestinian diaspora here in the US and in DC, it's one of the darkest moments on record for them, for this community. And I wonder how you're managing to do these shows in this moment, what you've observed with how comedians and how you yourself are perhaps dealing with this, and whether you've had to adjust certain things of how you do these shows.
Good question. Hi, everyone. I'm Rola. Thanks so much, Middle East Institute, for having us and for this wonderful collaboration, for believing in comedy. I think this is probably the only think tank in DC that has embraced comedy. Isn't that right? So hopefully this will be one of the most fun you have ever had at a think tank panel in DC.
That's a low bar, Rola. It's a low bar.
And thank you to the award-winning journalist, Rana, also for having us. I wanted to say that when I love what you're talking about, and that's exactly why I do comedy. And thank you for saying that I added to the comedy scene in DC. I really want to do something that's different. I don't want to do anything mainstream. I only want to do a show that's going to add to the scene and hopefully sell out. How I got into comedy, and I don't think I've said this before. You heard it here first, everybody, and whoever's online, hi, Mom. But really, how I got into comedy was during the revolution, but no, during COVID, right before COVID, my marriage was falling apart, which is not the worst thing that's happened in the past few years. And I started just going out to comedy shows by myself, and I went to a comedy show on 14th Street. It was like in a basement downstairs. I'm not going to say, the name of the place or anything like that. But I went in and I had just moved here from Egypt where we lived through the revolution. And I went in and I found like a lot of the comedians were getting like a lot of laughs, but I wasn't finding anything funny. And like, I speak English. I mean, it's my third language, but I think I can get the grasp of what people are saying. But I just didn't find anything funny, but everybody was laughing, clearly. Like, I was the odd one out. Just because everything to me just seemed really superficial, like, sort of one-liners. And, the other day, I went to McDonald's and this happened. I was like, I've never been to McDonald's. I lived in Dubai, Also, it's on the boycott list, so now we're not allowed to go to McDonald's anyway. But so what I wanted to, so during the show, I actually couldn't really sit through it, which you should never say about a comedy show in DC. Please don't tell the other comedians this. So I went to the bar and I was talking to someone who I did not know. He was a comedian. I said, oh my God, this is so terrible. People are just talking about their, private parts, and like, it's like very dirty humor, which I can't take it, because I'm a nice Arab woman, believe it or not. I left my chador at home.
That's debatable, Lola.
Yeah, exactly. No, but I couldn't, it was just too dirty and too superficial. And so this comedian was a little bit offended. And he's like, well, be the change you want to see. I said, okay, I will. So that was a really wonderful interaction because it's actually inspired me. And I like to say that, my slogan is appalled and inspired. So, I actually wanted to do something different. And like I said, there were a lot of talent, I met a lot of talented comedians that night. And when I got to speak to them, a lot of them obviously were very intelligent, very interesting, but they just didn't want to talk about it because they said, oh, that's too heavy. I said, somebody said his mom died and, he didn't want to talk about it. I'm like, well, you know what? I do. I want to talk about it because to me, people ask me like, why do you do dark comedy? Why do you do Traumedy? How did you find it? No, Traumedy found me. Like, I am Lebanese. You talk about PTSD. I mean, if PTSD had a face, it would look like this. No, but Lebanon, we've been through war, when we're still at war. We're probably like having a war right now. I haven't checked, my messages in the past hour. But, we've been at war for so long.
Oh my God.
No, I mean, this is what we come from. This is what we come from, right? We come from war, and that breeds innovation, but also breeds dark comedy because it is the only way to cope. And I think, and you know this from journalism, Lebanon is one that has the most love, free. I was going to say the only democracy in the Middle East. No, I'll leave that. But Lebanon has, like a free press, right? So people like make fun of leaders and all of that, and that started like 50 years ago. So that kind of dark comedy helps us, like uplifts us, unites us, educates us, and so on. So when I saw this opportunity in Washington, D.C., I said, there's huge opportunity to create something different, create something new. And so I got into comedy, and then COVID hit, which wasn't the worst thing. Actually, COVID was fun. I mean, I know a lot of people died, and it was horrible for some people. But for me, it was fun, because I got to wear pajamas and grow a beard. Maybe I should save that for tonight. But COVID was very hard for a lot of people. So we started doing Zoom comedy, all this kind of thing. So after that, I started, as soon as the world opened up, I had this rooftop comedy show where and of course it sold out, and it was masked, and people didn't even know what it was like. You want to go? Yes, I want to leave my house. I hate my husband. Yes. People just wanted to be out, right? Yeah. So it was a wonderful comedy show. That was in July 2021. That was the first comedy show I produced. And what was wonderful about it was that I talked about Lebanon. The Beirut explosion had just happened, and this Lebanese woman came up to me after the show, and she said, I can't stand you, but you made me laugh. And I said, that's what my husband says. But it was so good. She couldn't stand me because I post like photos of myself and thirst trapping as a woman in my 40s, which is, not okay, obviously. But she said, I haven't been able to laugh at what happened, and you made me laugh, and that's so important. And I swear, she inspired me, and she's like my biggest supporter now. And so what I learned is by doing Traumedy, by healing myself, by me laughing at my pain, you laugh at your pain, whatever that pain may be. And it's not only an Arab thing, obviously everybody has pain. Even white people have pain and trauma.
Actual pain, right?
Actual pain. Look at this white lady.
I can show you my scar.
This is my white friend, yeah. She has pain and trauma. So trauma I think is universal, Rana. I was gonna just go back to your question. I know, journalist, come back to the question. So just to answer your question about Arab American comedians, I had the privilege of performing at the Gotham Comedy Club at the New York Arab American Comedy Festival 6 months into going into comedy, which is like the ultimate privilege with Maysoon Zayed and Dean Abdallah, and I met wonderful comedians like Majdi Faris, who's a wonderful Palestinian comedian who's based actually here in DC, and he's been on a lot of my shows. And I said, what? We need to see Arab American comedians in DC. And I thought, if you want something, you can build it for everybody. So I'm so grateful that I did build it. I'm getting kind of teary, doing this because I am very proud of it. It's a wonderful show. The comedians are very talented, and we all have different stories, right? We're not all, guess what? They're actually Christians in the Arab world. I know, it's crazy. Where do you think Jesus started his influencing? Where do you think he got his first 12 followers?
So good.
So I'm saying it's a nuanced story, right? We're not all veiled, we're not all Muslim, we're not all, but it's like beyond the 9/11 terrorists. Like, I don't even talk about that anymore. That was 20 years ago. Kudos to everybody for doing the work to demystify, the demonization of Arabs and all of this, But hopefully now there's a new demonization of Arabs. So going back to your question, Rana, forgive me. So I've been running these shows for about 2.5 years now, Funny Arabs, and we had a show right after October 7th. And it was extremely difficult, Rana, and the comedians, we were all very stressed. There was also security risk, right? Are people going to come in? Are people going to boycott? And also we had a bit of hate, how can you do this at a time like this? I said, no, the show is going on. Yeah. The show will go on because the people who are there want to be there. If you find it insensitive, you don't want to come, I respect that. And some of the comedians, I gave them the option, do you want to perform or not? And some of them, it was just too painful. Yeah. Like for me, I said, to me, as a performer, and we all feel differently, it's very important to continue to perform. It's more important than ever to tell our story and to use our voice because, representation matters and existence is resistance.
And I think it's important to note that a lot of the gatekeepers of comedy, the Netflixes, the HBOs, have long ignored Middle Eastern comedians. Yes. And it's because of grassroots efforts like yours, because of comedy shows like yours and other efforts that they're even starting to pay attention today. And Joe, similarly, Black comedians have had to kind of carve out their own space because these gatekeepers of comedy have ignored them. The Kings of Comedy tour in the 90s is one example. How do you think Black comedians have forged the space of social commentary and social change? And what do you think are the best examples of that from what you're seeing now?
Yeah. One, kudos to Rolla. Yeah, I think, I think what she does is very important as a comedian in the scene, and then just seeing how she came in and the things that she did and the spaces that she created and the voices that she amplified is 100% necessary. And I think that's what we're all talking about here. It goes beyond comedy. I think what she's able to do for the community, how she's able to bring these vulnerable stories to life in the medium of comedy, sometimes I feel like goes over the head of maybe some of the other comedians in the scene or some of the people that even attend the shows, but I see it and thankful for it.
Yes.
But yeah, to your question, I think some comedians that come to mind for me that have been influential, at least in shaping my style of comedy, are people like a Dick Gregory, like a Moms Mabley, like a Dave Chappelle, like a Gerard Carmichael. And these people, I feel like, are people who, in their own ways, use their vulnerability to build a bridge, to create a conversation that hopefully leads to empathy. And I think that's usually kind of the path that I try to take. I mean, sometimes I don't even like to call myself a comedian. I just feel like I have opinions, I have thoughts, I have experiences, and the language I choose to express them in just so happens to be a comedic one. And I really didn't choose it. It just kind of comes out that way a lot of times. But for me, and I guess maybe an example of that was I created a short film about in 2018, and that short film was a dark comedy. And in 2018, the Me Too movement was really just all over the place. And for me, I was coming from the standpoint of just wanting a conversation to be had. It was a lot of, I feel this way, and I don't want to hear anything about how you feel. I feel this way, the same thing to the other side. And for me, I was always interested in just a conversation of, where are you coming from? What is your mindset around this? This is where they're coming from. This is their mindset. And if we listen, maybe that can build that bridge to empathy. So I created this film that was a dark comedy, just about the different sexual languages that men and women have, and some of the things that may have gone into their history of why they communicate this way sexually, or the lack of communication. And so we explored that mainly from a Black lens, and I was able to show that at school. So I went to University of Maryland, and I had a group of about 40 young Black men, and we got to show that. And then we had a talk back where we just kind of talked them through, like, the comedy was the thing that loosened them up. I think otherwise, if I would have just came in and said, hey, let's talk about consent, and let's talk about how to not rape somebody, like, nobody would come. But advertising it as a comedic short film, and then them seeing themselves, being able to relate to themselves on the camera, and then finding humor in the events and how we got to the message. I mean, I think Mary Poppins said it best, right? Like, is that Mary Poppins? Who says a spoonful of sugar makes a medicine?
Mary Poppins.
You look at me because
Mary
I'm
Poppins.
old?
It is.
I was looking for a white person to validate me there. I don't know.
Looking at me.
Yet again.
But it
guys
just
are
works,
old.
right?
This is why I'm here.
It works, right? So I was able to do that. I took it to high schools. I really wanted to get it into like a middle school, high school kind of situation before they start having those sexual encounters, so that they know how to behave and how to conduct themselves, and hopefully prevent some of those things. And I think one of the proudest things that I get to do currently, and you touched on a little bit, is I get to partner with my church. And that is special to me because I feel like therapy, vulnerability, all of these words are trigger words in the Black community, especially with Black men, and doubly especially with Black men in the church, right? They're just like, you better plead the blood of Jesus over your mind and cast depression out. They treat it like the devil. But I have been able to, with the help of my church, get together about 40 to 50 men once a month. And what I do is I try to do it in a way that will relate to them. So I took a sports show called Pardon the Interruption, and we use the format of that show. And what I'll do is we come up with topics surrounding mental health, topics surrounding depression, topics surrounding marital issues, infidelity, cheating, different things like that. And I'll come up with a video that starts the conversation, and usually it's comedic, right? I'll pull some clips or something like that. We'll make some jokes that introduces the conversation. Then we break off into groups, and we just have these honest, vulnerable dialogues. And I mean, I've seen grown men, 50 plus, hardest looking dudes I've ever seen in my life, never thought that they dealt with depression, end up like expressing and being vulnerable and opening themselves up, coming to tears. And I've seen the change that it's been able to make. And it's that type of work that I'm the most thankful for. And if it wasn't for comedy, I wouldn't be able to get into that door to open up those people's hearts to where they felt comfortable exposing themselves on that level.
And the fact that you got 50 men in a room in DC to talk about their feelings is a miracle in
crazy.
itself.
It's great.
God, we need more of you in the world. Yeah. Thank you so much for us.
So, Tamara, I wanted to ask you, are you taking appointments, and do you accept insurance? I think I'll ask.
Oh my God.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
Do I have
On behalf of everyone here.
All right.
Yeah.
Do I have openings? That's a good question. I think I have one. I'm not licensed in Washington, D.C. yet, so I can't take any
folks.
people in this state, but I can take them in California. But I was speaking with Rob yesterday. I'm looking to get licensed. And no, I do not take insurance at this time. for the benefit of the client and for the benefit of the clinician, because insurance will ask us to do therapy in the way they want us to do it. They will get access to the client's notes. Yep. They can take notes at any time, and our profession and the legal profession are the only two that have what's called client-therapist privilege, client-lawyer privilege, meaning that about 95% of the information that I am told I have to legally keep confidential, even that person being my client, unless they're going to go harm themselves, another person, child abuse, elder abuse, all these things. Legally have to break it. So, no, I don't take insurance.
Okay. Now that we have that out of the way,
Yeah.
is this idea that comedy can actually help trauma?
Oh my
Is that a real thing?
Yes. Yes. So, I've been working in this field for 12 years. Crisis work, humanitarian work, clinical work, I mean all of it. And I got to a point where nothing was funny anymore from the things that I have seen, right? And the things that I've heard. And I heard somebody say at one point, it really stuck with me, that in this work I have to live in an ignorant optimism. I was like, well, maybe this is the reality I have to be in. And then I went through the research as I was preparing for this. I myself went to a comedy show when I was in distress and looked at what was happening biologically in my body. And if you saw me at that comedy show, everyone would think I needed a therapist, because one minute I was crying with my head in my hands, and the next minute I was cracking up, nobody knowing I'm using myself as a research project. And when the comedians there found out I was there for research, made fun of me, saying only a therapist would go and do research on themselves, and they direct words, that's some evil scientist shit. I was like, never felt more seen in my life. So the answer is absolutely. So I want to go through some of the research to help you guys understand, okay? And let's talk about what cortisol is first. Let's start there. I can give. Oh, by the way, Rola, I want to tell you, we can't take you anywhere.
Oh,
And
thank you. I'll take that.
I am your biggest fan. I need to tell you this. I really am your biggest fan, and I was thinking that as we were talking, so before I forget. Okay, cortisol. Cortisol is the stress hormone that helps biologically regulate our stress response. We need cortisol in short spurts. It's important for us, right? It helps us get activated for some sort of threat. It helps get all the blood to our extremities. It triggers our sympathetic nervous system. That is needed. When we go on a roller coaster, our sympathetic nervous system is triggered. Cortisol gets triggered. Maybe if we go on a sprint, maybe we see someone we like, our cortisol levels get triggered. We need that. When I see Rola, my cortisol levels just go up, right? And this is really important. Here is the problem. When you grow up in an environment, whether there's neglect, there's chronic abuse, right? Domestic violence, sexual assault. You grow up in an environment where there's over-policing, community violence, right? Stop and frisk, war, conflict, policies that are created to have one community be suppressed over another community that can have upward mobility. Just the simple fact of knowing that can already raise our cortisol levels and keep us in a state of heightened cortisol over time. I mean, think about what we're witnessing right now constantly through social media, and I want to talk about that in a second. What happens is that the body has a really beautiful ability to adapt. We're actually incredibly resilient. And so when you live in an environment where your cortisol levels are constantly being asked to be raised continuously, the body will adapt and the cortisol levels will rise to a new baseline of 60%. 60%. This is a problem. Because, and I wanted to say this, the health impact into adulthood is it's going to cause hypertension, diabetes, raise the risk of life-threatening diseases into adulthood. It designs a whole host of mental health issues. It induces damage to the prefrontal cortex, which helps with executive functioning and helps us deal with threat and stress. And it creates a difficulty for emotional regulation. And when your baseline is 60% higher at its natural rate, any subsequent threat or any subsequent stress will spike your cortisol levels to 122%. Wow. Okay, before I go into the social media part of it, now I'm thinking, okay, I have to live in an ignorant optimism, right? This is what I'm seeing all the time. I'm constantly exposed to all the pains of the world. I'm seeing people's emotional experience, right? But then, what does laughter do? Laughter can reduce your cortisol levels by 32%. It increases the uptake of dopamine, which is the pleasure neurotransmitter of the brain. It's the pleasure system of the brain, okay? And it increases serotonin, which also helps with your mood. Okay, finding this out was a therapist's professional orgasm. Thank you very much. I was very excited about this.
Is she allowed to say that?
This is a comedy panel. I'm going to say what I want to hear. And not only that, hearing laughter. So not only experiencing laughter, but hearing laughter will actually trigger the autonomic, the autonomic nervous system, right? Which is where the parasympathetic nervous system is part of, and that's the part of our nervous system that relaxes. When we meditate, when we're watching a nice show, when we're laughing, when we're going on a walk, getting a massage, just hearing laughter, they saw in research after a stress-inducing task reduces our sympathetic nervous system and cortisol levels quicker. I don't even need to laugh, I need to hear it. How phenomenal is that? And when I went to the comedy show, and I watched the fluctuations of my body, what did I find? The minute that I did laugh, my body, my nervous system immediately regulated. Okay? There is something called mirth, and you probably know about mirth, right? It's the moment, the kind of emotion or the experience of amusement and laughter. And there was a researcher, and it is written in here, but I'm not going to go through my notes to find it. I forget his name. Who believed that if you experience mirth, you can't experience mirth and distress at the same time. And so I said, okay, I need to go again, use myself as a research study and find this out. There were moments, very brief moments, that I could not feel the distress and pain and suffering that I was feeling. And I said, absolutely, I need to speak about this, because I can go through the research, but experientially, that's what happened. What I want to say is the times that we're in are completely unnatural. We are in very, very, very difficult times. Yes, you can have the argument that we've experienced war and atrocities over the course of history, all these things, fine. But we have not experienced these type of events in the midst of also having social media and access to seeing human rights violations, crimes against humanity, killing, famine, oppression, colonization. I'm not going to go into it. We know what I am referring to. And all I need to do is swipe through my phone, and milliseconds I'm seeing another image and another image and another image. And then I'm seeing students that are protesting, and then an entire line of a police brigade coming at them. And then I see, obviously, videos of a gala mixed in there. I mean, it's incredibly confusing for the brain, but we're not naturally supposed to be inundated with this level of stress. And to remind you, the images that we're seeing are also being used at the International Court of Justice to help put a case for plausible genocide. And that's what we're being inundated with, minute, second after second after second. That's not natural. So imagine for us systemically, as a community, as a world, what our cortisol levels must be going through with social media. I did not go through the research, and I'm actually going to go because I'm curious that I would imagine that a lot of the youth now, just naturally, their cortisol levels are probably going to be higher. Our bodies, maybe this is anecdotal, are probably going to be adapting evolutionarily to higher levels of cortisol simply because of social media fragmentation and just seeing a complete fragmentation of global governance within the system. I think that is to answer your question. I, of course, have many other things I'd like to say.
No, it does. And your point about social media is really a good one. People who are following what's going on, they're in a high rise in Northwest DC and just traumatized from seeing things on their Instagram.
Yes.
And it's really kind of interesting to see because their body is in one place, but their head is in another.
Yes. And sorry, I actually had another thought.
It's a really good point. I've wondered the same thing. I think we all have at some point.
And can I add one more thing?
Yeah.
Do we have time for that?
Sure.
Okay. The thing about humans is our sophisticated ability for language. We're the only known species on Earth. I would assume we'd be arrogant to think we're the only ones in the entire universe that have the ability for language in the way that we do. And it's so powerful for us that words, sentences, and phrases get paired with persons, places, experiences, and emotions from our past. Right? And so when you experience a traumatic event, remember, or over time, it's a loss of control. And the brain needs to be able to make meaning out of what's happening. And so what happens when you're engaging in comedy, right? There's something called dialectics. The idea, and the way that I use it, is the idea that two seemingly opposing truths actually can exist at the same time. And what comedy is doing, if you watch, is it's a sandwiching of two completely incongruent concepts and framings together. And then there's incongruence theory that says they're so incongruent that you can't help but laugh at it. But there is the concept, at least in the work that I do within dialectical behavioral therapies, the ability to shift perspective through creating these dialectical frames to enhance what's called psychological flexibility. And comedy is doing that naturally because it's bringing new perspectives to understanding a concept. It makes you laugh. It creates an expansion of psychological flexibility and the ability to understand an experience or a context not just based through your own history and your own pains and get trapped in the intensity of that pain, but to actually begin to say, okay, that's one part of it, but there may be other perspectives, just like in Buddhism, they would say nirvana and samsara, which is the cycle of suffering, exists in the same space. It's just how does my mind perceive, how do my karmic afflictions get triggered in this moment to understand this moment, whether it's through the perspective of my pain or through the perspective of a completely different framing. And I think comedy is actually giving people the opportunity to regain control of what's felt so uncontrollable simply with the ability to manipulate language in a way the brain does not understand the difference between imagination and reality. And so you can actually regain control, regain meaning, create a new meaning of something. That's absolutely healing. I actually told a client yesterday to go to a comedy show as her
Mine, of course.
It was Rolla. This was last night. So the answer is yes to everything.
Amazing.
Thank you. And we'll take some questions from the audience if you guys have any, and we'll make it brief. I can hand the mic over if anybody has. We have a secondary one.
I think you should write a book.
You think I should write a book? Yes. Why don't we write a book?
You can write it.
I hate writing. Help me.
No, but this is
Joe's a writer.
the whole time I'm listening to you, as someone who's read all the book, like this is a whole book on its own.
Oh, thank
The
you.
research.
Yeah.
for
Thank
sure.
you so much.
Yeah, comedy is healing.
Yeah, I'm gonna. I mean, just after you said, I think I'm gonna increase my ticket prices to $100.
Actually,
Oh yeah, you can call it therapy.
Our comedy will lower your cortisol levels.
literally, you better pay. Give me. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
I actually had the thought up here that MEI, who has an entire department for mediation and dialogue, could look at how can you start problem-solving workshops, dialogues, in the Track 2
Yes.
frame with comedy. Yes, Claudia. She is an expert in conflict resolution and mediation, by the way. How could you start with comedy at the onset, knowing this research to lead people of two completely different communities? So this is a thought I had. Thank you. I'm done.
Yeah. You could use improv for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yes. Hold on.
Hi. First, thank you all so much for your expertise and time. This was so fantastic. I had a question about the science. You were mentioning that laughter can reduce your cortisol levels. And as someone who scrolls social media and gets the laugh online, but has also seen the trauma you're talking about,
Yes.
I was curious if you know how much laughter really does reduce the cortisol. Is it something short, or do you need to have 30 minutes of, is there a time on that?
I don't have the exact numbers for you, but it's pretty rapid. It's pretty rapid. I mean, when I talked about the idea that you potentially cannot have mirth and distress at the same time, how quick that is within a millisecond that I wasn't feeling my pain. It was short-lived, right? But it helps regulate the nervous system. So the answer is pretty rapidly, but I'm sure if you laugh for 30 minutes, you're going to be the happiest person for the rest of the day. Yeah, and there's nothing, I mean, I go on social media myself and will scroll just because I find it so funny away from, that's sometimes actually my relief, and my family will know I'm doing it because they can hear me laughing from the other side of the house. So, yeah. Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you. That was an amazing conversation, really fascinating. You know, we do run a conflict mediation program, and we bring together Saudis and Iranians and Emiratis and Europeans and Americans, and I think we need to invite the whole Traumedy team to come and loosen things up. But having said that, maybe really you could just give us a sense of kind of maybe, I assume you sort of know what your team of comedians tonight, like what are some of the issues besides some of the, you've talked about Gaza, what are some of the issues that get brought out and sort of unpacked in your Traumedy shows. Your Arab American comedy shows, I know the issues well.
Yeah.
Marriage, cross-cultural connections, parents, generational differences. But what about in your
immigrant
Traumedy?
mom, you know,
Yes,
oh my God,
exactly.
you are not married yet. Yeah,
But in your
exactly.
Traumedy shows, what should we expect tonight?
Thank you for that question. Once again, we have a DC Traumedy Festival, first of its kind.
Oh my gosh.
Collaboration Middle East Institute. So yeah, thank you for that question. I was going to say that the comedians tonight are not only Arab. We have black comedians, we have white comedians, and we have a range of people with different sorts of trauma. So the trauma they have is like I don't want to give it all away. Have you guys bought tickets for tonight? Yes. Okay. For those of you who have not, exactly. For those of you who have not, I can tell you what they're going to talk about. Someone, someone's mom died, someone's brother died, somebody was experiencing a lot of racism, somebody had a divorce, attempted suicide, like a range of trauma. And unfortunately, a lot of it is dark, but it is funny. So what's been really wonderful about the Traumedy shows is that we're able to talk about that from our own experience. It's not like dark comedy doesn't mean like me making fun of someone who's underprivileged. No, it's about talking, because often people get confused, like what is dark comedy? No, it's not you making fun of someone who's it's not you punching down. It's you talking about your own issues and making them funny, transforming it. We'd say turning pain into punchlines. And what's interesting about the Traumedy shows, thanks for asking, is that we have a Q&A afterwards where the audience, if they want to, share their trauma. So one interesting thing that happened at our last Traumedy show, I mean, it's funny now, but now as I'm saying it, maybe it isn't, but basically this guy said that he's like, he was really inspired after the show, and he's like, oh, thank you so much, my wife cheated on me, and then I got mono, and then I got cancer. So everyone burst out laughing because it was like the end of a Traumedy show, But the point is, the guy,
It's absurd.
It's absurd, but also he felt, but he clearly wanted to tell us this. I wanted to laugh about it, but he said, I've now healed, I've gone through chemo and all of this, and he felt better. So I think it's really important. Like in my personal life, I try to use, a lot of dark comedy as well. I have a friend who got cancer, so now, anytime we go out to a club or whatever, and there's a line, I go to the front like, listen, my friend has cancer. And she tells him that she had like a, whatever, I don't know if you can say this, we're live anyway, she had a mastectomy, and then she's like, oh, I'll show you. He's like, no, please, let's just walk in. So I think it's really important to heal on a personal level, not just like, oh, we're all here having fun. So hopefully when the audience goes home, they actually feel better, and we have like such a dramatic feedback. And Joe, by the way, Joe is a fantastic comedian, as well as many other things. And he's been on a lot of my dark comedy shows. But, after our dark comedy or Traumedy shows, like people come up to me, they say like crazy things like, oh, I haven't laughed in 2 years, my husband has cancer, like this kind of like intense reaction, which is what I want, because I'm intense. So hopefully tonight people will be able to enjoy and heal with us, so thank you.
So good.
We need to capture those responses.
Yes, thank you.
Back to the
Well, yes. We actually have a TV crew coming tonight, so yes, thank you. Yes. I have a question. Is there any more water? There's no water.
Rolla, you can
The
totally
river.
have mine. You can have mine.
It's like
I'm not going
being
to drink it.
in the
Yeah.
Middle East. No, thanks.
No.
Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. Thank you a lot for this panel discussion. As I am a literary reader, traditional literary reader, we only know about comedy and tragedy. I want to ask you about your new kind of form that is Traumedy. Is it based on certain features related to comedy? Is there any authors or playwrights you are based on or inspired by to introduce this kind of a new form of play? That's I would like to ask about.
Thank you. Are you asking me?
Yes.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, because you are the creator of Traumedy.
I will take credit for introducing Traumedy to the world. No, I mean, I unfortunately, I didn't invent Traumedy, but I'm happy to say, I don't want to say I introduced it to DC or whatever, but my shows are very different. There's not, one person who's like, my inspiration or this kind of thing. But basically, like, in Lebanon, the kind of comedy that we have there, it's all Traumedy. You know, it's all like, you know, we live in hell, it's not getting better, and we just laugh about it and overcome it. I also want to add that I lived through the Egyptian Revolution, and it was hilarious. You're absolutely right. And there was lots of funny moments. Like there are people going up in the Egyptian Revolution with like signs that say, you know, my arm hurts, please go to Mubarak. Irhal, this kind of thing. Obviously in Egyptian, not in Lebanese.
There's a book about that, about the comedy in the Egyptian Revolution.
Exactly. It was extremely funny. And then we had the guy with the sign.
Mom, I ran out of za'atar. Could you send some?
Yeah, exactly. The signs end up being like extremely funny. But also, you know, out of like the Egyptian Revolution, where you know I lived through that, you had people like Bassem Youssef, you know, who started Traumedy. And, you know, we were there, like there were like millions of people, like you would stop everything. You would like not go out on dates, you know, not have your baby, not deliver a baby, just so you can go. I planned my C-section around like, you know, Bassem Youssef's show because I wanted to go and watch him live. So we'd have these watch parties where we would watch Bassem Youssef, and he basically talked about, you know, all the horribleness of what's going on with like Manshar Ghassil in the background, with like a clothing line in the background. And he would talk about all the issues and make it funny, but he was an educator, right? And he was really, you know, inspirational. And you know, I would say to him, you know, we're like, you know, we're fellow Traumedians, but obviously, you know, he's like up there, you know. And now he sells out arenas, and he started, you know, he was a surgeon. He was like, oh my God, this is a disaster. Like, look at this dystopia we live in. So if you're saying like, if there's anyone inspired, I'm very inspired by him because I saw his rise, and he's also, you know, a wonderful person, all of this, but he's an educator. I mean, that would be my dream. I hate to mention men when I say, "Oh, look up to this person."
He's
Sorry,
amazing.
Joe. But I would say he's very much an inspiration. And thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And it's not always sophisticated. Like one of Bassem Youssef's most famous bit on Al Barnabig was when he made fun of Mohammed Morsi's like graduation outfit, and he just came out in a big hat. Like sometimes it's just ridiculous, has no sophistication whatsoever, but it's good and it's funny and it's just to the point.
He's great.
I have a question for Katie about going back to that question about, or going back to the thing about gatekeepers. And you also talk about, you know, like the human rights space. There's a lot of, you know, in the nonprofit world, there's a lot of like educating the donor and getting them to understand what you're doing. So when you're talking about agitating the gatekeepers, do you find it's a similar process? There's a lot of like education to be like, hey, other things are funny. Like could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So I've always existed in these really disparate kind of professional worlds. So there's the entertainment industry, then there's like the academic world. Talk about a group of people who need comedy. Are there any other academics in there?
Yes.
Oh my God. And then the activist communities, I've worked on lots of different social justice issues over the years, from reproductive health to environmental justice. I mean, just lots of different things. And you all know, of course, there's like sub-communities around each topic of injustice. So I think there are gatekeepers on so many different levels when it comes to the comedy work. So to be honest with it, this is kind of fun to say in this group, I think, is I guess much like Rolla, kind of like looking around and thinking, oh, there's an opportunity. My work started because I was frustrated that what we think of as like communication around social change and human rights and social justice was really only doing what I would call like earnest work, right? Like earnest, serious work. So I thought there's such a huge role for comedy in public and private engagement in trauma and in injustice, really. But when it came time for me, I did this big research project that I told you all about. Like, this couldn't have sounded more serious, right? It was like funded by Gates. It was very serious. And I started giving talks about the research that I had done about, like, here's the evidence for how comedy, when we experience comedy as audiences about civic, social, and public health issues, here's what happens to us, you know, on a psychological level, but also on a cultural level. Here's what we do with comedy as an artifact. We're more likely to share it. It has a sleeper effect, like all these things, right? Like real hard science from lots of disciplines. the people that were most resistant was this sector. So I would give these talks and say, like, I'm a professor, and also here's a bunch of research, it's peer reviewed. And there would inevitably be someone, and I would give it to sort of, I would say, writ large civil society or NGO communication people, and or people that are in charge of public engagement campaigns in some level. And there would always be someone at the end. I would give, what I thought of as like the best, most persuasive talk about why should you, literally I would call the talks, why should you take comedy seriously in serious social justice work or human rights work? And give all this evidence. And there would be someone in the back of the room that would say, well, what do you do if the comedy goes too far? And ask what I would call a series of limiting questions. And I would say, respectfully, you're already not doing it right. If the first question you're asking is actually not curiosity, and like, oh yeah, I have that one show that my family all watched together, and that was the one way we could talk about XYZ, right? If you can't find that at all, and then we hold, and I love saying this in a room of people who do cultural work, why do we hold cultural work to this impossible standard that we don't hold other, like, what? Tell me about the journalism that's changed. I mean, why? And then we say, like, tell me one piece of comedy that's done XYZ. It's a whole constellation of things, right? So I found that to get the gatekeepers in philanthropy and civil society writ large, funded by philanthropy, all of my work is funded by foundations, so I say this with great affection and gratitude, but the number of talks that I had to do to prove why we should take comedy seriously, it took me a full decade to actually build. Now there are a whole bunch of funders that are actually doing this, but I would have to, often before getting grants, I would have to go to someone's decision-making body and do a very serious professor talk where I was not very funny, because I don't think that's what they wanted me to do, but a very serious talk. And so I think this work of actually creating shows, like what Rolla is doing, creating shows, creating evidence. The SN Laughter Lab, which is how I know both Majdi and Yasmin, we are trying to agitate gatekeepers in Hollywood, Hollywood, as we know, and the entertainment industry in the United States, of course, has been structurally biased against almost every group of people since it was invented. And so if we can't agitate through successful shows, what we do in the SN Laughter Lab is work with a bunch of comedians who are incredibly talented, and there are many roadblocks set up and sort of the structural reasons why Hollywood is a little bit broken when it comes to just white heteronormative men, et cetera. And agitating that through success is really important. The same way that we agitated philanthropies through success, well, let us build models, let us do research and show you the success will actually be the way that you agitate that. And then when you do panels like this, honestly, and there are a couple of people who maybe had never thought about it, and before I hope that's a couple of you, and you go back to whatever community or constituency you represent and think, I never thought about comedy in that way. That's actually how we agitate gatekeeping systems that exist in every industry. And I think that until we do that through little acts that become bigger acts, like your show at the Kennedy Center, that really become successful. People want to follow success when we think about the entertainment industry and philanthropy and all of that. But I think for some reason, comedy it's hard for us as serious, smart, thoughtful people maybe to relax enough into the idea that comedy is not just silly. And I think it's just a kind of self-protective, risk-averse stance that we all take in every industry. And I think, agitating that is actually a really, really important part of this work, is to say, we actually can take this seriously. Here's all this research, here's the work that you're doing in your church, amazing. Here's the shows that sell out, actually market success. That's how I think that will start to change. So I don't know if I directly answered your question, but this agitating the gatekeepers thing is something I do a ton. Like the subtitle of my book is Comedy for Social Change and Civic Power. The civic power part of the title is actually my favorite. My editor did not like it. He thought it was really nerdy. But civic power is important, because if you empower There's something I write about in the book. It's going to take me way too long to explain it, but this idea of cultural citizenship, that when we see ourselves marginalized and dehumanized and even portrayed in tropes of hero and villain, and that we are really ostracized culturally, and how meaningful that is and how important it is for comedic portrayals of groups of people to actually start to chip away at that, not just on an interpersonal level, but at a big mass cultural level. So I did not answer that question at all. This is my first outing. I already mentioned that. You'll forgive me. Incoherence.
If I can add, thank you, Katie, for all the work that you've done. You know, I'm a new entrant into this. I started about 3.5 years ago, and actually I'm gonna start doing these shows that are like comedy for systemic change. So I love that you've opened the doors and you've started that route. I think it's really wonderful. And I guess, what I want to say to people who work on peace or policy, it hasn't worked. Forget trying to shift minds via lobbying and so on. We're just going to do comedy as lobbying from now on because everything else has failed. Sorry, that was thank you.
There are no policymakers in this room.
Sorry?
There are no policymakers in this room. Or there might be, but hold on to your message. So
Oh no, I was talking live.
For audience at home, I think.
Actually, can I add to that? That's a really, really, I
I'm
know
joking.
that
I'm
was a
half
fun
joking,
joke, but
yeah.
no, that's actually really important. I was speaking to a decision-making philanthropy person a couple of years ago, and part of why they finally were interested in comedy, actually, they were like, look, civil society is in trouble all over the world.
Yes.
Authoritarianism is on the rise. Creative expression is being clamped down. Everything that we were investing in prior, we thought these were tried and true, like good, thoughtful measures, like over-indexing in investigative journal, which of course we need. Again, I always say, I'm like, you're representing investigative journalism, but not maybe investing in cultural strategy, and which is like crazy, because actually if you look at how, anyway. But part of what we were talking about was, look, we really will turn to comedy now because we see that what we have been doing is definitely not sufficient. And so that's when I say, like, why not comedy, right? Because if you're trying literally everything else and the world is in this much trouble, why would we not try every possible cultural
Absolutely.
strategy?
I was half joking, but obviously politicians also use comedy.
Of course.
I mean, sometimes badly, but
Yeah.
sometimes it works. So it's just another tool that we shouldn't overlook.
That's right.
That's my serious message.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Can I ask a question of Joe? So, Joe, have you been invited by any other churches or cities to do the work that you're doing with men?
Not-
Can you take this beyond?
Not yet. I actually just started last year, so it's only been going for a year, and it's been going great. Haven't been looking to branch out just yet. So I grew up in D.C., and I have a heart for this city to help my people. And I don't know, I kind of like building at home. And that's why I work at the church, and I work with different schools. One school that I'm currently teaching a filmmaking class with is Maya Angelou Public Charter School. And that's really a school for kind of second chance kids. And they're really like, when you connect with them, and comedy is such an easy way to get to them because they're a difficult bunch to like get to focus, to get to listen, to get their respect. But when you can, and I find that comedy is that like that crack in the door that allows them to relax a little bit. And I think one of the secret weapons of comedy is the vulnerability and truth that it originates from. And also it comes from trauma in itself. Like usually comedy is birthed from some traumatic experience that we translate into this comedic art form. But yeah, I just thoroughly enjoy, especially with what's going on in DC, specifically with the youth and the carjackings and the violence. Like it is, for me, it is urgent to do this work here. And for me to even leave it, I feel like it's almost turning my back on my community. And I mean, to be Black and to be in America is a traumatic lived experience in itself. So I am more than happy to dedicate my life and dedicate whatever gifts that God has given me, whether it be filmmaking, whether it be comedy, whether it be acting, to helping people process those traumatic experiences and use them as steps to move beyond and share to help others move with them.
It's so important. I hope you can get grants just to expand in
Yeah.
DC, right? It just sounds like this is something that needs to be grown significantly.
Yeah, let me know if you got any.
Good luck.
And you'll hear jokes about that, not to tell you what's going to happen tonight, but you'll hear jokes about that tonight as well, which also serves as a way to educate people on what's really going on.
Is the show here?
Yeah, tonight's show is here,
I'm
and
so
tomorrow's
sorry
show
I didn't
is
get
Anacostia.
tickets.
Oh, sorry, it's sold out.
May I say something?
Sure.
Do we have time for that?
A short note, serious.
I'm just sitting here and I'm thinking about everything that's being said, and my thoughts are just formulating, right, like this. And I want to actually make the argument that putting up or creating shows and pushing for laughter is a pushback to the system.
Yes.
Yes.
It is a
Yes.
social justice act.
Definitely.
And let me explain why. Think about being in elite spaces. Laughter and making jokes is shunned upon.
Yes.
It's shunned upon in those spaces, and who tends to dominate those spaces? Think about that. Those spaces are gate-kept, and many times people of color, the BIPOC community, people from other cultures have a harder time getting to those spaces. I look at the three-dimensional world as a representation of the one-dimensional experience of the mind, as the as a macro psychology that's just put into a three-dimensional world. And so if laughter is shunned upon, and we look at those spaces, and those spaces have less marginalized people from marginalized communities, right? Are we agitating simply by pushing for laughter and pushing it up into those spaces and saying, no, we're not going to be defined by these elite spaces that are going to tell us we have to behave in some type of way to feel professional, to fit into a certain space, and only when I behave in a certain way, dress a certain way, look a certain way, do I have the ability for upward mobility into those spaces. This is a direct social justice act, Rolla, what you are doing. And I also want to say that every emotion we have serves a function. It's like us having opposing thumbs. We needed to be able to survive evolutionarily within tribes, and our emotional experience determined, okay, if I feel this way, then this actually may be what's happening, and it's going to organize my behavior so I can survive, because if I was ostracized from my tribe, what's going to happen? I'm not going to survive. We're obviously not living in the same level of nomadic tribes, but laughter is incredibly important. It serves a function, and it communicates between people interpersonally, needs to be met. And so we need to push the idea of accepting laughter and joking and a different way of presenting culturally into spaces that have historically made sure that those ways of behaving cannot exist. And which is very problematic for the world. I mean, look at what's happening. We need to find a different way of relating to our emotions. And I would say that our pushback to laughter is a direct response to the macro trauma that we live in that tells us we have to act a certain way. And so is this really the creating a movement of healing through this idea? I'm formulating thoughts on this stage, but this is, I'm going, so this is what came to me.
Well, thank you all for coming. You guys are all exceptional individuals, all very funny, and it's been great to sit and talk with you. And thank you all for coming today.
Thank you.